Chapter 12. The Senior Strut. Saturday night arrived with a kind of frantic energy usually reserved for a natural disaster. The Senior Strut was held in a local community center that smelled of floor wax and mothballs. Reba stood by the stage, watching in horror as Van tried to lift a massive speaker cabinet while wearing a shirt that said Roadie. "Easy there," Van Teed called out, adjusting his microphone. "That's a vintage cabinet. It's older than you are." "Don't worry, Ted," Van grunted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I've been doing squats. My glutes are like granite." Barbara Jean said roadies need to be visually impactful. "Brock, get off the stage," Reba shouted as her ex-husband crawled around Ted's feet with a flashlight. "I'm checking the grounding." "Reba," Brock shouted back. "This stage is made of plywood and hope. One power surge and Ted here becomes a human sparkler." In the corner, Cheyenne was trying to drape a faux fur stole over Ted's shoulders. "It's about the vibe. Ted, you're too flannel. You need to be more stardust." Ted caught Reba's eye. He looked like a man who was reconsidering every life choice that had led him to this moment. "I'm so sorry," Reba whispered as she reached up to straighten his collar. "Don't be," Ted smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "It's like being in a circus, but with better snacks." The show began, and for a few minutes, the chaos subsided. Ted's band was tight, soulful, and perfect for the crowd of seniors who were surprisingly enthusiastic about jazz-infused blues. But then, Barbara Jean decided the show needed a grand finale. She hopped onto the stage with a tambourine, wearing a dress that reflected every light in the building. "Hit it," she shrieked. What followed was a 10-minute rendition of Mustang Sally. That featured Barbara Jean doing a high kick that nearly took out the drummer, Van attempting to do a stage slide that ended with him tangled in the guitar cables. Brock, ever the inspector, rushed onto the stage with a fire extinguisher, convinced that Van's friction on the floor had created a fire hazard. Reba watched from the sidelines, her hand over her mouth. It was a train wreck. It was a disaster. It was the most hot family thing she had ever seen. Chapter 13. After the Senior Strut, Ted and Reba sat in his car in the parking lot. The interior of the car was dusted with a fine white powder from Brock's safety measures. "So," Reba said, breaking the long silence, "how were the lemon squares?" Ted leaned his head back against the seat and started to laugh. It wasn't a sarcastic laugh. It was deep and genuine. "Reba, I have played in dive bars in New Orleans where people threw bottles. I have played in subway stations where rats were my only audience. But I have never, in my life, been safety inspected mid." "I'll talk to Brock," Reba promised, "and I'll change the locks on your studio so Barbara Jean can't get in with the salt lamps." Ted turned to her, his expression softening. "You know, when I met you at Petit Jacques, I thought you were just a woman looking for a quiet book and a glass of wine. I didn't realize you came with an entire theatrical troupe." "Is it too much?" Reba asked, her voice small. "I know I'm a survivor. Ted, I can handle the laundry and the drama, but I don't want to survive a relationship. I want to enjoy it, and I know my family makes that difficult." Ted reached out and took her hand. "Reba, look at me. My life was quiet before I met you. It was peaceful. It was also incredibly boring. Your family is loud, they're intrusive, and they're borderline insane. But they love you. And strangely enough, I think they're starting to think they need to protect me too." "Brock thinks your legs are too skinny for the wiring," Reba joked, a tear pricking at her eye. "And Van thinks I'm a rock star," Ted added. "Reba, I don't want the quiet Tuesdays if they don't lead to the crazy Saturdays. I want the whole thing. The lattes, the sequins, the fire extinguishers." Reba felt a weight lift off her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For years, she had been the one holding the umbrella in the storm, making sure everyone else stayed dry while she got soaked. But here was someone who was willing to stand in the rain with her. "You're a good man, Ted," she said. "I'm a musician," he corrected her with a wink. "We're notoriously bad at making sensible decisions." Chapter 14. The loveness of sound branding may have been short, but the fallout from Barbara Jean's brief tenure as Ted's marketing guru was still settling. Reba found herself spending more time at the studio, not because she was interested in audio engineering, but because it had become the only place she could have a conversation with Ted that didn't involve someone asking for orange juice or a dental record check. One Tuesday evening, the red recording light was glowing outside the main booth. Reba sat on the frayed sofa in the lounge, nursing a lukewarm coffee. Inside, Ted was hunched over a mixing console, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was working on a new track, a departure from his usual bluesy riffs. It was softer, more melodic. Reba leaned back, closing her eyes. She recognized the rhythm. It felt like the heartbeat of a long afternoon spent on a porch swing. "You like it?" Ted's voice crackled over the intercom, startling her. She looked up. He was watching her through the double-pane glass, a shy smile playing on his lips. "It's different," Reba said, walking toward the glass. "It's beautiful. Ted, what's it called?" "I was thinking of the Survivor's Waltz," he said, pushing a button to let her into the booth. "But Barbara Jean suggests the Crimson Rose of Texas. She even wrote lyrics, something about thorns of divorce and blooms of destiny." Reba groaned. "Please tell me you didn't record them." "Only as a backup. In case I need to torture a hostage." He pulled her close, his hands resting on her waist. "I wrote it for you, Reba. No lyrics, just the music. Because I think you've had enough people talking at you for a lifetime." For a moment, the studio felt like a sanctuary. No phones, no family, no fire extinguishers. Just the low hum of the amplifiers and the scent of Ted's leather jacket. But then, the door to the lounge swung open. "Ted, Reba, I've brought the harmony." Barbara Jean's voice boomed through the speakers. And a backup choir. "Well, it's just Van and Cheyenne, but I've given them robes." Reba looked at Ted. Ted looked at the door. "Robes," Ted whispered. In walked Barbara Jean, draped in a shimmering blue gown, followed by Van and Cheyenne, who were indeed wearing what appeared to be choir robes, fashioned out of bed. "We've been practicing," Cheyenne chirped. "Van is the bass, I'm the soprano, and Barbara Jean is well, she's the soul. I have the oohs and the OZs ready to go," Barbara Jean announced, stepping right up to the microphone. "Hit the record button, Teddy, we're making a hit." "Ted," Reba said, her voice dangerously calm. "If you hit that button, I am leaving for Florida, and I'm not bringing back any juice." Ted looked at the choir, then at Reba, and finally at the mixing board. He reached out and slowly clicked the massive mute switch. "Okay, guys," Ted said, his voice echoing through the studio. "Let's take it from the top. But first, Van, why are you wearing my headphones on your neck?" Impact, Ted. Visual impact. Chapter 15. The Llama Incident. The legend of Ted being fired from a llama ranch had become a staple of family dinner conversations. It had reached such mythical proportions that Jake had eventually demanded proof. "I bet the llamas liked your singing," Jake challenged during a particularly rowdy taco night. "I bet you just weren't edgy enough for them." "Edgy?" Ted laughed. "Jake, a llama is a four-legged ball of spite and wool. They don't want edgy. They want to be left alone to judge the human race in peace." "I want to see it," Barbara Jean declared, her eyes widening with a new project. "The ranch. It's only 2 hours away. We could have a reconciliation retreat. We'll bring Ted back to his roots, and I'll lead a mediation session between him and the llamas." "No," Reba said. "Absolutely not. We are not driving 2 hours to watch Barbara Jean apologize to livestock." 3 days later, they were in the minivan. The ranch was a dusty stretch of land outside of Austin, populated by about 50 llamas who looked exactly as Ted had described, deeply judgmental. The owner, a grizzled man named Silas who still looked angry about whatever Ted had sung back in the day, met them at the gate. "You brought him back," Silas spat, looking at Ted. "The crew." "We're here for healing, Silas," Barbara Jean cheered, stepping out of the van with a bag of organic carrots. "Ted has changed. He's a professional now." "He still got that guitar?" Silas asked. "The last time he played bridge over troubled water, the lead male, Barnaby, went on a hunger strike for a week." The afternoon was a masterclass in hot family chaos. Van tried to bond with a llama by staring into its eyes, which resulted in him being spat on within 30 seconds. Cheyenne spent the entire time trying to get a selfie with a baby llama, only to have her phone nearly swallowed. But the real trouble started when Barbara Jean insisted on the mediation circle. "Everyone, sit," she commanded, forming a circle in the middle of the paddock. "Llamas too. Come on, Barnaby, join the healing." The llamas, sensing a weakness in the human perimeter, began to close in. They didn't look like they wanted healing. They looked like they wanted the carrots Barbara Jean was sitting on. "Ted," Reba whispered, as a large brown llama began nibbling on her hair. "Do something." "I told you," Ted whispered back, looking genuinely nervous. "They hate my vibrato." Sing. Ted Barbara Shing.